Okay, and we are live. We're going to go ahead and just wait a few minutes for people to join. Welcome everybody who is here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're just going to wait a few minutes for a couple more people to join for the evening. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with just a few announcements. First of all, thank you so much for joining us for our Conversations with CAGT, our first one of our, I guess we could dub it our second season. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And remember that we will be here every Tuesday at 5 with experts and professionals from the field speaking all about gifted education. If you do have any topics of interest to you, just don't hesitate to reach out to us and then we will try to make that happen for you. A few very quick updates. If you have not heard yet, we are hosting the National Association for Gifted Children Conference, and it is coming to Denver in November 11th to the 14th. It will have in-person and virtual components. And if you register and become a member, if you join and you renew your NAGC membership, please use the following code 21CAGT in the referred by field of your membership profile, and doing that will help CAGT financially, as CAGT will receive a rebate for your membership, and you'll also receive a free CAGT membership for the 21-22 school year, which is going to be very, very important, as you will find out tonight as we go through some legislative updates. Also linked to NAGC, we will be doing our art contest, and there'll be further information coming out about that. So definitely, we hope that we get some good representation of art from our fabulous students from around the state of Colorado. So I'm going to go ahead and start recording. And just a really quick introduction. My name is Dr. Colleen Ehrlich, and I am the president for the Colorado Association for Gifted Children. This presentation has changed a little bit. Dr. McKinney isn't able to be here tonight, and so it's not going to be as much of a state of the state, but just kind of going through some legislative updates because, as some of you may know, CAGT tries to be very active in terms of policy. And so I'm going to be talking and giving a little bit of context for all of you. And then we will have one of our lobbyists, Jennifer Cassell, giving some information. And then our legislative chair, Paula McGuire, talking about some of CAGT's current goals for this upcoming legislative session. So if we can please go to the first slide. This slide is just letting everyone know that in the state of Colorado, we actually do have mandated gifted education through the Exceptional Children's Education Act, or the ECEA, which is important because gifted education is not federally mandated or funded. So actually many states do not have mandated gifted education, and we do, which is a very great thing. So you can see those top 12 areas that the administrative units, or lovingly called the AUs, are required to address. And then that final one at the bottom, early access, is essentially up to them in terms of whether or not they would like to include that. But those top 12 are pieces that they are required to address within ECEA. And I think, you know, I'm not going to go too much into those, but if that is something that people are interested in, then just reach out to us and we could certainly do conversations with CAGT specifically on the ECEA so that we could dig into that a little bit more. But I think the important pieces are that it is is not federally mandated, but it is mandated within the state of Colorado. Then within that also we have two different major funding pieces. So we've got 3150 funds, which are called categorical funds, those have to be used to support gifted education. And then we have 3228 funds, which is the Universal Screening and Qualified Personnel Grant, which we will be hearing even more about later. And the important thing with that is that it's a partially funded grant, and it can pay for up to 2 universal screenings and 1 half-time qualified staff to oversee gifted education. And the key there is partially funded grant. And so it rarely, if ever, funds 2 full universal screenings at 2 different grade levels and a 1 half-time qualified staff. Next slide, please. So this information is just giving kind of a snapshot. It's based on the October count from the 2020 data from last year. So you can see that there are 65,493 formally identified gifted children in the state of Colorado. So that's about 7.4% of the students K-12 in Colorado are formally identified as gifted. And I think, an important piece too, because we were just talking about the Universal Screening Qualified Personnel Grant, is that if you look at the numbers from 2nd grade to 3rd grade, a lot of the universal screening does happen in 2nd grade. And there's actually a very large increase there from that 970 formally identified kids to 2,816. And then further on as they continue to collect the body of evidence and then formally identify students, which is great. And ultimately the purpose. I think the other piece of this information to really lift up is down below in that 3rd box for ethnicity. We still have many underserved populations in Colorado, including Indigenous students, Black and Latinx students. And so I think that just remains a huge driving point for so many of us at CAGT in gifted education in Colorado and across the United States and world, is that equity piece on ensuring that equitable access and opportunity as we just move through things. And if we can go to the next slide. So these next 2 slides are just 2 different studies that have been released that kind of give a little bit of an information. Again, another snapshot. This one was released from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation in 2018 and really looked at 3 different grading areas of policies, participations, and outcomes. And Colorado ranked 3rd in the nation for our policies. It was one of 14 states to receive a grade of B or better for our work in supporting excellence. And we were one of 4 states that had a strong results across all 3 of those grading areas. But however, just taking us then back to those underserved populations, that we know that we are getting some strong policies in place, but we're still not quite where we want to be, obviously, in terms of equity. And so that is actually shown very well in the next slide. And so this study is released from 2019 in Purdue. And you see the dreaded red kind of across this one. So again, that top piece, that we do have strong systems in place with mandated identification, but it really is that equity of access that is a much needed area of focus. And just showing that students in our Title I schools are identified at only 47% of the rate of those in that non-title school. So again, just lifting up that equity lens in terms of next steps, and where we're just passionate at CAGT, as well as just gifted education, and where we're just headed as a field. So that is just some very quick context of where we are in terms of a state, from students formally identified, policies, identification. Again, a lot more that we could dig into. If you ever want conversations with CAGT to dig into one or some of these things, then definitely let us know. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it off to Jennifer Cassell, who is one of CAGT's lobbyists, and she's going to introduce herself and discuss her role in some pertinent legislative updates.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Cassell, and I, as Colleen mentioned, I am part of the lobbying team. my other partner, Ed.D, he and I have been the lobbyists for CAGT for, I believe, about coming on 3 years now. So we are fairly new to the organization, but we have both been down at the Capitol in various capacities as either lobbyists or legislative staffers or budget analysts for many years. Me, upwards of about 13 or so years. Ed's been around for more than 20. And we do lobby for various different education associations as well too. So just to kind of talk a little bit about, why would CAGT need an organization? Why would a lobbyist? Why would gifted and talented programs need a lobbyist? Really any organization or industry that is regulated by the state or that receives funds from the state really should have a lobbyist, somebody down there listening and helping you develop relationships and really trying to achieve some goals that you may have. Throughout the year, of course, Ed and I were on call to members of CAGT, to the staff, to anyone who partakes in the legislative committee. We review all legislation that's introduced during the legislative session. There's interim committees that meet in the interim that we also track. Again, we communicate with all kinds of different legislators. Specifically, we work very closely with those legislators who serve on the education committees, really to talk to them about CAGT and the benefits of universal screening and so many other things as well too with gifted and talented education. We do also work very closely with other education associations, to make sure that we have strong partners in any of our efforts. And then, of course, all of you are probably familiar with Gifted and Talented Day at the Capitol. We do work to help coordinate a lot of the logistics, work with legislators to help with their shadowing of students and those kind of things. So really we do quite a bit down at the Capitol for our clients, and Paula is going to talk about what we're hoping that we can accomplish here in a couple of years to come with Gifted and Talented. Thank you. So to give a little bit of a recap of what happened this past year, I will say in general that the 2021 legislative session was a good one for education, for both K-12 education as well as for higher education. It was also a long legislative session. It was an intense legislative session and very aggressive session. There was a lot that was accomplished. But if we look specifically at what happened with education, probably the most significant was buying down of the budget stabilization factor. That budget stabilization factor is now back to where it was prior to some of the budget struggles that the state had with the pandemic. So it's now at $572 million. That is going to be an average increase per district of about 10.4% for the coming school year. So that's great news. The legislature also increased special education funding by $14 million this year, which is about a 3.8 increase. The legislature did increase SPED funding last year as well too. So this is on a positive trend. We also saw an increase in funding for school infrastructure. A lot of that has to do with the BEST program. But legislators this year really wanted to spend some money for school infrastructure. There's also some dollars that are going to teacher training and such. And then lastly, with gifted and talented being a categorical, we do receive an increase every year per Amendment 23. And we did receive an increase of upwards of $150,000 for this coming year. So a lot of good things that happened with the budget. And then if we look at some of the legislative items that happened, a couple of bills, nothing specific to gifted and talented, but as I mentioned before, there was a big push to help support educator workforce in Colorado. There was a large bill, Senate Bill 185, that created 2 new programs to help try to have more of an emphasis in the state for really developing and honing in for educators moving forward. So there's going to be a program within the Department of Education and also one within the Department of Higher Education that really has these goals of teacher recruitment, education, and preparation type programs. And there's $13.4 million that's going to go towards this effort. Another bill that was also good for educators was House Bill 1104. That extends the licensing period for a professional educator, gives them 2 additional years to work to get their license renewal. So that goes from 5 to 7 years. So another good piece of legislation. As we look forward, some things that are going to be impacting gifted and talented, it's going to be a little bit more of an impactful year coming up. This summer and fall, we have a school finance interim committee that will be meeting. It is going to be bipartisan, I believe, equal membership on that committee. We have seen that committee the past couple of interims that has met, and they're planning on doing it again this year to really look at school finance. One of those issues that they may be looking at as well too is possibly removing gifted and talented funding from a categorical that could be moved into one of the factors within school finance. Some of the factors, some of you may or may not be aware, but there's cost of living factor, there's an at-risk factor, size factor, those things. So gifted and talented could very well be a factor. We don't know exactly what that is going to look like, whether that will be a per pupil basis, or there could be a couple of things. So we are actively following this conversation, and of course we'll be actively tracking this. We do believe that this could be a good thing. This could mean maybe more funding for gifted and talented programs here in the future. So we aren't too concerned about it being removed from a categorical, but we do see this as being a potential positive change. Another great thing that's going to be happening is that the state's economy is really moving on an upward trajectory. So we're going to have a strong general fund moving into next fiscal year, which of course is going to be good for education all around. So thank you, Paula. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So I'm going to take it from here to talk about how CAGT specifically wants to advocate for gifted funding this year and really narrow it down to the Universal Screening and Qualified Personnel Grant that Colleen referenced, and then put it in the context of what Jennifer was just talking about with the upcoming potential of moving gifted out of categorical funding. So my name is Paula McGuire. I am the CAGT Legislative Chair for the Legislative Committee. So I work with Jennifer and Ed on anything that's coming forward, and then liaison back to our executive board to make sure that we're all aware and can advocate the best that we can for you. So your Universal Screening and Qualified Personnel Grant, we in the field just call it USQP, is available to all administrative units. So your administrative unit could be your school district, but if your school district's part of a BOCES, then your BOCES is the AU, and the Charter School Institute's a separate one. There are 64 administrative units in Colorado, and every one of them is allowed to apply for this grant once a year. And they're allowed to apply for 3 different elements: a universal screener for a primary grade, kindergarten through 2nd, a universal screener for a middle school grade, so 6th to 8th grade, and at the same time, placement tests for already identified gifted students. So students who've already been identified prior to that middle school screener, they can take a placement test instead and have that qualify as cost covered for something like how far or to accelerate them in the area in which they're identified. And then the third element is up to a 0.5 FTE for qualified personnel to run the gifted program for the AU. This will look very different at every AU depending on how your AU handles it, but nonetheless, every AU has the right to apply for all 3 of these. All right, so looking at over the last couple years, just the history of the grant was first available in 2014. So the first available usage was spring of 2015 for universal screening. That means we've done 7 years inside the Universal Screening USQP grant. The initial provision set aside from legislation was $1.79 million. And it's important for you to remember the number has not changed. So I'm going to show you a graph next that explains why this is becoming more of an issue. Over the last 7 years, the amount of the request for the Universal Screening and Qualified Personnel Grant, you can see on the blue columns. So increasingly, and we'll talk about why in a second, our AUs are requesting more and more money from this to support universal screening and having that 0.5 person. But the red line shows you our funding allocation hasn't changed. So the state has to choose to allocate this in a way that's equitable across all of the AUs. And the way that they do that is a pretty simple formula. They take the total amount available, which is always 1.79 million, and then they divide it by the total request for the year and get a percentage. And that percentage is applied to everybody across the board. So in recent years, our percentage that each AU has received has gone from around 50% of their request to now just under 40% for this upcoming year, which does make it more and more difficult for our AUs to use the money effectively and make choices. It forces choices on where they can give their universal screener and or whether they can hire a qualified person to interpret those test results, to figure out how to use the test to identify students moving forward, and then to, of course, place them appropriately for programming. So this is pretty foundational to helping our AUs have the money they need to move forward in moving Colorado toward equity. All right, so why the increase in the request? As Colleen already told you, these funds are allotted in addition to funds that have been set aside by Colorado designated for gifted students. So your school district or your AU is actually receiving what Colleen called the 3150 funds. And those are set aside by your student count, not by your gifted student count, but your overall student count. And a formula is applied to that. USQP funds are allotted, as I just told you, by a percentage of the request. So you have two different funding sources. Over the last 7 years, however, our AUs have varied widely in their ability to give the universal screener, both at a primary level and the middle school level, or their willingness to give it at both levels, simply because less funding has required choices on how they use that money. So what we're seeing is many of our AUs are still choosing to give the universal screener at the primary level, and many of them are choosing to opt out of giving that screener at the middle school level so that they can still have money left over for qualified personnel. But there is also some shifting in the presence of qualified personnel in our AUs. So what we're seeing is that as school district budgets have been strained over the last several years, the GT position may end up being combined. And you may have a GT director that is also an instruction and accountability coordinator, or that is also a school principal, or perhaps a full-time teacher in your building. So all of those factors are working together to really put more strain on what this request looks like across our state. So this leads to our overall legislative goal for 21-22 school year, which is to fully fund the USQP grant. That would mean for the state of Colorado, if I took you back to that graph, that we're looking at somewhere around $5 million to actually have enough for every district to give a middle school screener and their elementary screener. And then on top of that, hire a 0.5 FTE for the AU level. So some things that we would really encourage you to do as a stakeholder, whether you are a teacher watching this or a parent or even a school administrator, first thing you can do is find out what your own school district or administrative unit funding is. And you can do that by going to the gifted webpage for CDE. It's a pretty easy search to do. But once you get to that gifted webpage, there's a short menu on the right side, click on Director's Corner, and then just click on the budget button. And you'll be able to find a listing for both the 3150 funds and for your universal screening funds. I will warn you that both of those funds right now, the links there are for last year's dollar amounts. This year's dollar amount should be posted shortly for both of those, but last year's even will give you a good idea of what you're looking at and what your district has received. So just being aware of that is helpful. Second, if you don't know, now's a really good time to figure out who your state representative and senator are, and not just for your USQP grant or in support of gifted students. But you can just do a simple Google search for Find My Legislator Colorado. It'll take you to a really simple website. You can put in your street address, and then it'll tell you who both your representative and your senator are, so that you can be prepared to email them or to call their office with your thoughts on gifted funding in our case, when that time comes and we need your public support, because we'll definitely be reaching out and asking for that. Again, it's always helpful to know who your representative and senator are for other issues as well. So take a few minutes and go do that. We would really encourage that. All right, Colleen, that covers what our general goal is for the year from the Legislative Committee. I think that we're going to be opening this back up for questions at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. I think one question was Jennifer Ricks had asked, you know, what can we do to support this? And I had written back in the chat that one of the big things right now is to make sure you are a CAGT member, so that when we are providing information to our membership, that you are receiving those. And if we ask for any action steps, like what Paula was saying in terms of contacting somebody, that that you are ready to go with that. And I think it's going to be really important this year, especially because typically what happens is every single person who attends the CAGT conference gets essentially a free membership to CAGT for the year. The issue this year is that we are not holding a CAGT conference. We are hosting NAGC. And so we really need to get the word out to everybody that either one, you can use that when you hit the referred by, you can put in that CAGT information and you'll automatically become a free member of CAGT if you register for NAGC, or you can go to the CAGT website and it's $20 to become a CAGT member and then receive all of those communications as they come out. And so I think that that's just a huge piece, because I know for me, even I take for granted that every time I register for the CAGT conference that I'm automatically becoming a member, and I'm not used to having to become a member in a different way. So I think that that is a huge piece in terms of what to do to support as we move through this. Paula, Jennifer, anything else on that you could think of to support? I know, Paula, you had that slide.
I would also ask Colleen, if somebody's already registered, but they didn't do that, can they back into that?
That's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we could find out and send that out to people. But if it all of a sudden becomes you know, October, and you are like, hey, I haven't heard anything from CAGT in a while, that might be a pretty good indication that you might have to go in there and renew your membership. But that's a really good question on whether you can back into that if you've already signed up. We also had a question from Emily Stone. And she asked, as we identify more kiddos, how can we ensure more funding to support them after they've been identified, especially as we identify a more diverse population? So do one of you two want to take that? Share your thoughts?
Jennifer, I'm assuming you don't want to take this. I don't know. I think both of us would like to say that there's a pie in the sky dream. We all want more money for the programming of these students. And it's an excellent question. But I do think we have to start with supporting the identification of who they are, so that then we can demonstrate that we're reaching some of those equity marks and have now a different argument for needing the money to support their programming. So I would call it a one step at a time approach. But Jennifer, do you have anything different to add to that?
There we go. Let me unmute myself. No, I don't, Paula. That is a fabulous answer. We would certainly love to be able to, you know, go above and beyond getting funding for just universal screening and qualified personnel, you know, but it is kind of a one step at a time type of deal, especially down at the Capitol. So no, I would just echo what you said there, Paula.
And let's see, in terms of when we will need public support on that, like on this, Jennifer, is there like a specific timeline you could share that even tentatively?
Sure, no, absolutely. And this is all just tentative. So, you know, there is a lot of behind the scenes work that is going to be occurring this summer and fall as we start having more conversations with legislators and having very in-depth conversation with legislators and really trying to focus in on getting a commitment to get our funding increased. When the legislature convenes, it is planning to convene in January. I suppose you never know if something might interfere with that, but the legislature will convene in early January. And I imagine our goal would be to either get a bill introduced very early on in the legislative session, or work with budget committee members on, you know, what's called a figure setting type of request for the budget. And either one of those would probably happen sometime in February. So when the time comes, what I imagine will happen is once we know exactly which direction we're going in for this funding request, you will certainly hear communications from CAGT on reaching out and how best to reach out. And we will certainly coordinate that with everyone, because we are going to need a big push from CAGT members, from those parents, from those students, from those educators. So my tentative timeline for now is probably, mid to late February is when you might start hearing from us on when things are going to be ramping up, when we might need you to, you know, to step in and start showing some support there. The session goes until May, so nothing is final until the session ends in May. So there could be a big push come February, but then also once the budget starts passing through the legislature, which usually happens in kind of, early April, perhaps, that might be another time for when there could be another push as well too. And then of course, everyone will keep their fingers crossed until the legislature adjourns come early May.
Perfect, thank you so much. So we had another question. Can you please explain how funding for statewide talent pool in each district works?
Did you, for talent pool only? Let me clarify that question. Or for gifted?
I think that, the question was for statewide talent pool.
Okay, so I guess actually, I suppose it's not totally relevant to the answer, but because our funding comes as GT funding, gifted and talented. So there's nothing set aside specifically for talent pool, but the general answer is this. Gifted 3150 funds are set aside given a formula based on your total overall student count. So there are our AUs are split up into two categories first. One is AUs that are single districts, which is mostly your large urban and suburban districts. And then the second set is rural districts and BOCES. And one formula is applied per student for our urban and suburban schools. And it is quite frankly a simple per student cost. I believe this year, don't quote me exactly, but it was like around $10.20 or so per student enrolled in your district based on October count. And then for those rural and BOCES level schools, the formula looks a little bit different because they are given a base allotment simply because overhead in our rural schools costs more. And so they're given a base allotment first and then a per student on top of that. And that formula gets much more complex. So I don't actually have that in front of me, but I hope that clarifies it, at least a little.
There's nothing so complicated as school funding.
Right.
So it looks like we don't have any further questions. I think that if anybody does have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at CAGT. Again, we're happy to hold another conversations with CAGT with this as we get closer, or if there are certain policy or questions you have that you would like us to dig in further to, then please don't hesitate to reach out to that as well. And I just want to thank you so much, Jennifer Cassell and Paula McGuire, for coming here this evening. And again, my name is Dr. Colleen Ehrlich, and I'm the president of CAGT. And we are all just beyond honored to serve all of you and gifted children across Colorado in this way. And we thank you for your support and attending tonight. Have a good one.